event. And lastly, before I introduce our guest...
Do that again. We got nothing.
Okay.
We're live now.
Oh. Hey TCSTV viewers, it's Evelyn here from the camera store. Off to a little bit of a shaky start this evening, but thank you so much for your patience. Looks like we have people from all over the world joining us tonight. And it's great to see such a wonderful audience. And of course, you're in for a great treat. The Night of the Owls with Rob Hadlow, also known as the Owl Man. But of course, this is a live show, which means anything can happen. But we do have the TCSTV live dream team working behind the scenes to iron out all of the kinks. We have Gary and Jeff and Riley working tonight. To make sure that everything goes as smoothly as possible. And none of this would be possible without our sponsor tonight, which is Sony Canada. A huge shout out to them for making all of this happen. And of course, the best part about these live stream events is being able to interact with all of you. So there's a couple ways that you can do so. First one, of course, interact in the live chat like a lot of you are doing already. Ask questions, comment. We want to hear from you. And there's some fun things that will come up a little bit later for you to participate in. But if you want to participate and you're not logged into YouTube, you can also email me, evelyn@thecamerastore.com. That's EVELYN at thecamerastore.com. And we'll be able to answer questions from that as well. So before I introduce our guests, I want to mention one last thing about Sony. They did arrange for anyone who's attended the event, if you're in Canada, you can take advantage of a 10% offer to get back on a prepaid Visa card. And this is if you order something within 30 days of the event. You do have to be in Canada and there are some exclusions, but we'll email you those details if you registered. If you didn't, you can still join that list. Evelyn@thecamerastore.com is my email, and I will make sure that I add you and get you in on that offer. And of course, it's the holidays, and Rob has some wonderful greeting cards. He has quite a selection at the camera store, and we are doing a special offer in partnership with him for 20% off. We'll post that link in the chat, and you'll get an email of that as well. But if you want to get some great greeting cards for the holidays, for Christmas, you have someone special on your list that likes wildlife, or maybe you like wildlife, this is a great option. So check that out. But if you don't know our guest tonight, Rob Hadlow has not only had a long legacy at the camera store, he has also become known as the Owl Man around here. And he's had such a rich history immersed in photography, equipment, and nature for decades. And his specialization in bird and owl photography has really just naturally evolved. And of course, he's coming to you live from the camera store tonight. Let's welcome him, Rob Hadlow. Thanks so much for joining TCSTV Live.
Well, hey everybody, how's everybody? Pick a card, any card. As you know, that's a great introduction from Ev. Thank you very much. As a lot of people know, they know me from, when we're out and about in the field. A lot of people run into me, and there's a lot of great photographers out there and a lot of good friends. And a lot of good friends of mine call me the Owl Man because I do specialize in owls to a certain extent. That's one thing that I've been fascinated over the years has been owls, and especially the last 4 to 5 years I've really concentrated quite heavily in doing a lot of owls.
You speak owl, let's be real here, Rob.
I see owl, that's right, I see owl, that's right.
I just want to stop you for 1 second because before we get into your presentation, you brought a special gift, and I'm going to try to hold it up because it is huge and beautiful.
Sure.
But we have a wonderful framed print that Rob put together for us for this event. And so again, if you registered and you're in Canada, you are automatically entered to win this frame print. Make a wonderful gift for yourself, or again, someone on your list that loves owls or nature photography. And if you want to get in on that, there's still time. We're going to do the draw tomorrow. So again, I'll say it one more time, but my email is evelyn@thecamerastore.com, and we will add you to that list. But Rob, we're so thrilled to have you here tonight at the camera store. And so yeah, I'll let you take it away, and you can give us sort of a little bit more history about why you're so much into owl photography and owls.
Sure. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us tonight. The weather here in Calgary tonight is typical December snowy weather. Some of you in southern U.S. who are joining us, of course, don't have the luxury to see the snow, but the snow makes owl photography even better. We have some of the great species in Alberta. We have 11 owl species in total in Alberta, and only a couple of them go south for the winter. Most of them stick around. Since I've been photographing owls, especially over the last 4 to 5 years, you really pick up behavioral traits, and you learn your species, you learn to see what they do and how they behave in all types of weather. I got involved, I guess from a young age. I always had a thing for raptors from a young age. I can remember growing up that I just fell in love with owls and eagles and all different types of raptors. And I think what drew me into owls is that they're just so fascinating. They're very mystical. A lot of people will associate owls with like Harry Potter. There's always something to do with them that are just so very, very interesting. Now, tonight, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through the 11 species that we have in Alberta that are native to Alberta. They are also found, of course, in other parts of Canada and a little bit of the United States as well. And it'll be kind of a bit of a quiz kind of video. What I'm going to do is I'm going to play some sounds from some of the owls. And if you'll send Ev your answers on the chat or via email, we'll answer them and just say yes or no or whatever. But they're pretty easy. It's not a hard quiz. Some of the owls you'll find here in Canada and in Alberta. Some of them are large and some of them are very small. Small can be anywhere from 5.5 to 6 inches tall, which makes it very interesting to find. Then you have your great grays, which of course is the largest species in Alberta by just size, not by volume, but just by pure size. So let's jump into it, and I'll give you the first hoot, so to speak, and go from there. So let's try it. And would anyone like to take a guess on which owl species that is? That is the great horned owl, for those who are interested. It's also known as the tiger owl because of the stripes. It is probably the most common owl you'll find throughout North America. It is found everywhere from Alaska all the way down to Mexico. It's interesting in terms of its size. The great horned owl is smaller in the warmer climates, of course, because it doesn't have to put on the bulk for the winter. But as you come further north, the owl gets bigger and heavier to combat the cold weather. They say their nature's perfect killing machine because a great horned owl will eat anything. Like, I mean, anything. They'll eat rabbits, cats, dogs, gophers. You know, they're the perfect killing machine. Their hoot, a lot of people go, well, that's an interesting hoot. That is the most common hoot that you'll find. Like if you go to a city park, you go to the wilderness. That's probably the most common hoot that you'll hear at night. The hoot's been known to be called, in human translation, is called, "Are you awake? Me too," is how the hoot goes. So it's interesting how people put kind of a saying to different hoots. And that just happens to be the great horned owl.
I'm surprised we had a lot of people guess that one correctly. So well done, Jennifer, Wendy, Elizabeth, Amber, Michael, Lori, Kristen, lots of people.
Everybody. That's great.
I'm impressed they got that right. And Jennifer said they eat skunks.
Yeah, they're the only animals, they're the only bird species, the only predator, really, that will kill a skunk. They're immune to the scent of a skunk. Occasionally what will happen if the skunk gets a lucky shot and gets it into the owl's eyes, then yes, it can blind the owl. But it's funny that the skunk is actually skunk and rabbit are one of the better preys that the great horned owl prefers, especially rabbit. Like if you got rabbits in your neighborhood, all you need is a great horned owl and it'll take care of the rabbit population really quickly. Going on to our next species. This species is really interesting. It is in Alberta. It's funny, it's more located in northern Alberta than it is in southern Alberta. And it's also located throughout BC as well. More common in BC than it is in Alberta. But the hoots are really interesting. And I'll play the first hoot. So, can anyone identify that particular owl? This owl is called the Bart Owl. This is common in, especially you see it a lot in eastern Canada, BC, a little bit here, like I said, a little bit in Alberta. It has a very unique hoot to it. The hoot is, "Who cooks for you?" "I do." It's very interesting, and because it's very kind of a deep hoot. And the experience that I have with the Bart Owl is they also jumping ahead a little bit, they have one of the loudest hoots out of any owl species going. They can be heard from 0.50 miles, so half a mile they can be heard from, which is very interesting. And when I was trying to chase down a Bart Owl last fall, I could hear its hoot because it's such a long distance away you could hear it. I just couldn't find it, until a couple months later I did end up finding it, which is great. So, like I said, Bart Owl, it's about a little bit smaller than the great horned owl. It is a larger owl species. Again, it'll eat, things like mice and voles and rabbits and, just about almost similar to a great horned owl. The other thing with the Bart Owl, it's one of the only owl species that has black eyes. Most people recognize owls with yellow eyes, but the Bart Owl has black eyes, very charcoal-like, like there's no pupil. It's really an interesting owl to see in the wild. Let me just quickly show a couple images of the Bart Owl.
Perfect. You just answered the question. We had Lucy and Kathy asking about seeing some photographs.
Sure. If I can find it here. There it is. So that's a Bart Owl. Notice that it's quite gray and its stripes run vertical. And you notice the eyes, they're just that charcoal black. But I love their hoot. It's the, "Who cooks for you? We do." So that's the Bart Owl. Like I said, they're more common in northern Alberta than they are in southern Alberta. They are around, but they're really hard to find. They're like super, super hard to find. So if you happen to hear that hoot, it's very unique. So you know that there's a Bart Owl in the area if you hear that. All right, so going on to the next species. This is one of my all-time favorite owls. This owl is only 5.5 inches tall. Can be as tall as maybe 6.25 inches. It's really small, so it's smaller than a pop can. They're, like I said, they're really hard to find. They're easier to find in the wintertime because there's no foliage on the trees. So they really stand out more because you'll see them usually sunbathing on the top of a tree. So let me just play one of their hoots. Or more of a toot. All right.
So before you answer what that one is, and people are guessing, we just have one other question about the previous owl.
About the Bart Owl,
sure.
sure.
A specific reason why their eyes are black, and if it gives any advantage for hunting or anything like that, do you know?
Not that I know of. They're just the how good Lord made them. It doesn't really help them. That question's been asked before to a lot of the owl experts. I don't think it helps them one way or the other. They are known as mostly a strictly a night owl. Like there are owls that hunt during the day, But the great horned owl and the Bart Owl are one of the owls that you'll find mostly at night. Dusk and dawn as well. You can see them at dusk and dawn, but they do hunt mostly at night. So it is a question of, does the black owls help them out, with the darkness? Possibly, but there's no real scientific proof that I've seen to say yes or no in either direction.
Okay. So lots of guesses here. Pygmy Owl, a lot of people are saying.
That's correct.
That's correct.
That's
All right.
correct.
Good job, guys.
That's terrific. That's a northern pygmy, to be exact. There's different species of northern pygmy owls found throughout the world. Northern, of course, being where we are, the northern hemisphere, northern pygmy owl. It is the second smallest owl species in North America. There's only one that's smaller, which is found in Arizona and south, like Mexico and places like that. Would anybody like to take a guess at what that one's called?
Might have to give them a couple seconds.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, absolutely. So you think if the pygmy owl is only 5.5 inches tall to 6 inches, 6.25 inches tall, you got to think, geez, that other one's pretty small, and it is smaller.
Is that?
No.
No.
It's called an elf owl, and it runs at about 5 inches, 5.25 inches tall, and like I said, it's found only in southern climes like Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, and Mexico. But that's North America's smallest owl. But like up here, the pygmy owl, I got a good friend and some other people, and we all refer it to as, if you're looking at a pygmy owl, because they're so small, you look for a fuzzy baseball in a tree, because that's almost the size of it. It's like the size of a baseball, but of course feathers, so they're, fuzzy baseball kind of idea. And that's what they look like. I remember the first pygmy owl that I saw, I was driving, and I was like, what is that? It's just really, and yeah, it looks like a fuzzy baseball in a tree, because they're, sort of rounded. They got the rounded head. And let me just play some pictures of the pygmy owl. And I just love them. I just absolutely love them. And they do, when pygmy owls are seen and the word gets out, it certainly becomes a huge flock of photographers trying to photograph them.
So Natalie Sonner emailed me saying that she didn't know what hoot it was, but it's making her dogs go a little crazy, go a little nuts right now. These guys are kind of cute, kind of fierce looking.
They are kind of cute. I watched it catch a vole one night there, as you saw in that image, and the vole is as big as he or she was, and it's just they're like a little rocket ship, because they were on a branch and they went choo, and I was like, whoa, and it was the vole was in this wood pile, and it just like dove in, grabbed it, came back to the branch, and was kind of showing it off, saying like, look what I caught, kind of idea, which I thought was really interesting.
JP is wondering if they want to listen to some of the sounds later on. What's the website that they can check out?
The best website is Audubon, AUDUBON.org.
Okay. We will get that link in the comments here for you guys. Yeah, I think Riley's on it, so she'll get that link put into the comment for you guys, so you can check that out.
Yeah, it's a common birding site that's got a lot of the calls, and they list off like species behavior, breeding habits, eggs, things like that, what they eat, how their nesting habits are, how long the young take to fly. It's actually a lot of good information. It's a lot of really good information. Now, our next owl species is quite common to Alberta. It's usually found a lot in northern latitudes, like there's a lot around the Wetaskiwin area, but it does frequent Calgary now and again. And I was happy as well as lucky to find one last year here in Calgary, which was just amazing, because they're a smaller owl. They're a little bit bigger than a pygmy, actually a lot bigger. They're probably double the size of what a pygmy owl is. And again, they like the northern climes, so they're very adapted to the species. And let me just play a quick call. Now, any guesses what this is? Think of a forest.
Kathy's saying saw-whet owl now. We have boreal.
Boreal is correct.
Boreal.
It's called a boreal owl. Again, it's a smaller owl species, about the same size probably as a northern saw-whet, maybe a little bit, well, probably a little bit bigger. They're very, very hard to find. Like I said, this one, there was a breeding pair here in Calgary over the winter last year. I really hope it comes back this year. It was very interesting to find. It was a good tip, and I really appreciate the tips from people, and it's kind of told us where to find them, which was wonderful. Let me just quickly pause that. You'll notice the facial features of it. It's quite got a round head. It's got similar markings to the pygmy owl, but still slightly different. Again, and then it's got the yellow eyes, and it's got the long tail, and very, very prolific hunters.
Do they change quite a bit seasonally between like winter and summer?
No, they generally stay the same. Generally stay the same color. Again, they don't like they're a nighttime owl, so they're usually strictly nocturnal. You'll see them during the day, usually like morning and just before sunset. That's what makes them so hard to find. And because they're here year-round and they're so small, it's hard to find them in things like foliage. So like in the wintertime when there's no foliage on the trees, it makes it much easier to find them.
So would this photograph that you shot have been like morning or?
These were afternoons. These were about 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
We have a question from Paul asking how big their nests are.
A lot of them will use like the cavity of a tree, like a northern saw-whet, a pygmy owl. I believe the boreal as well will use a cavity of a tree versus a thing. Let me just quickly look here. Yeah, nest holes. So they're hiding in the cavity of a tree is where, and usually it's like a larger woodpecker, usually like a pileated woodpecker hole that they started and either didn't come back to, or it's a new nesting site they've used, so the boreal owls will move in and take care of it and use it as themselves. I don't know if anybody knows this, but owls do not make their own nests. So the bigger owls like great horned owls, great grays, Bart owls, you'll see them use things like squirrel nests. You see them use things like eagle nests. Any nest that's just kind of large for them to be supported. They might throw a branch in or two, but owls do not make their own nests. So they sort of, I wouldn't say scavenge for a nest, but they'll find a nesting site because, like for instance, the great horned owl. The great horned owl is the first owl to breed out of any of the owl species. It usually starts to breed at the end of January, and the young will be born towards the end of February. And so they beat things like hawks, like they'll take over like a red-tailed hawk's nest. So of course the red-tailed hawks don't come back till March, and they come back and they go, why is there an owl in my nest, in my home? So, so that's their opportunity. They'll get nests like that, and that's what they use. There's been a couple of great horned owls that I've followed throughout the winter, and like from breeding season on, and you think, when Calgary gets cold, like really cold in February, you gotta, that's one tough bird, because it's quite often 30 below outside, and she's sitting on the nest, and it's like some of the nests sometimes are exposed, sometimes it's in a snag of a tree, and you gotta think, whew, it gets a little chilly, sort of idea. So
We have a question here from CrossX Overland, wondering about what brand and camera and lenses you're using. And maybe we can go back to the picture of the owl to take a peek and maybe talk about what you're shooting with.
I use the Sony mirrorless system quite often. And then I also use a longer lens, usually up to a 600 millimeter. I used to use just a 1:4, but I found that the 400 didn't have the reach. The 600 gives me really great reach with most owls. The snowy owls, I usually have to use a converter, like either a doubler or a 1.4 converter with the snowies, because I find them to be, I just call it as is, they're flakes. They just, they let you get within so close and then they're gone sort of idea. So I find by using a converter, it helps quite a bit with them. And
you've been a big fan of that 200 to 600 millimeter
lens, right?
For
a long time.
Have something a little bit more accessible.
It's
not crazy
price.
The
nice thing with the 2 to 6 is that you can run through the bush. Like quite often with the great gray owls, I'll be walking through the bush, hiking through the bush, and that's when you'll find a lot of the great grays, because they're sort of in the back country, back in the I call it the bush, and thickly, densely forest sort of idea. And if you're carrying like a prime 600 f4 with you, which is a great lens, but it's so much bigger with a 2 to 6 or a 1 to 4. It's so much smaller and lighter, and you can maneuver it a lot easier when you're in tight quarters.
Do we have one here, Gary? Well, maybe if we do, we'll show it. But Andy Thomas was wondering if you have any tips about spotting them, since they're so well camouflaged and they're so small and they don't really move around a lot, especially as you said during the daytime.
Right. A couple of the tips that you can always look for anomalies. Like for instance, a great gray. Like great grays, also called the ghost of the forest. They blend in. Same with great horns. They blend in so well with the tree. But you'll see things like movement. You'll see something that doesn't quite look right. Like you might see movement first, and then you'll kind of stop and you look and you go, there's something that's not right there. So then you grab your binoculars, and you have a look and you go, there it is. Just because it just doesn't. And of course, the yellow eyes too. But a lot of times, sometimes they got their eyes shut and you don't notice them. But especially if they're in the thick forest, it's really hard to see. I followed a great gray family this year, and you're walking through the trees and you're looking around. All of a sudden, you kind of look over your shoulder and it's there, and you're like, whoa, it's just very interesting. The other thing too is a lot of the smaller birds will sound the alarm of a predator. So things like magpies and crows like to pick on owls, especially great horned owls. You'll see magpies creating a ruckus, especially when there's a great horned owl in the area. Same with the Bart Owl. They're always creating a ruckus. And then as small as chickadees, like Pygmy Owls and saw-whet owls, they'll go after a little chickadee. And so what will happen is when there's a flock of chickadees, they're always sounding the alarm, and it's like a really large racket. So you'll listen to things like that which go, why are they making such a noise? And it's a little different than just their typical chirp or their typical calling. It's just very loud and it's very agitated. And so you're like, okay, there's a predator in the area, and then you start looking. And then you generally, like a northern saw-whet or a pygmy owl, you'll sort of go like, okay, I got it, because it's really concentrated in that one little area where they're hiding. And then, like I said, in the wintertime, pygmy owls like to sunbathe on the top of treetops. So when you're on the top of a treetop, or when you see it on the top of, when you're walking through parks or the forest, look at the treetops, because you'll see, as I said, you'll see that little thing sitting on top of a tree branch, and you're like, whoa, there it is. Versus the summertime, it's really hard to see because they're so small and they're hiding. Now, a pygmy owl will hunt during the day, it'll hunt during the night. It's a diurnal, so it doesn't really have a particular time. And the other thing I'll notice with pygmy owls is pygmy owls, and that's what I learned this year, is that they'll stash their food. So during a 2-week period, they'll catch a number of prey, usually voles or mice, and they'll behead it. They'll eat the brains and take off the head, and then they'll stash the rest of the body in a tree trunk or in a branch area, so they come back to it later, so that when the hunting, like if the weather turns bad, they've got particular, like we have our refrigerators, that's their natural refrigerator, and they'll have it tucked away somewhere, and they have particular trees in the area where they're living where they'll hide their caught prey so that they come back and eat it later. One of the pygmy owls I was watching this year did that. Like we saw it hunt. It was hunting more in the evening, but then it came back in the morning and it picked a vole out of the tree that it had stashed and was eating it for breakfast. So it's really interesting on how they do it. Now a lot of people go, oh, it's eating the head first and the nourishment. The brains have got a lot of nourishment for the owls, and so that's what they do. Kind of idea. And later on, you'll see a picture I've got of a northern hawk owl that you'll see the vole and it's missing its head, so to speak, off with its head, kind of idea, right? So, but a lot of owls, like the smaller owls, will, like the pygmy owl, the saw-whets, the boreal owls, the hawk owls, they'll often eat the head first, and they'll either stash the rest for later or eat a little bit later and then stash it, versus the bigger owls like the gray and the great horned owls and the Bart owls, they'll swallow their prey whole, and always head first. It's one thing you'll notice with owls is they always swallow their prey head first. Now, I don't know if that's because they want to look at their prey as they're eating it. I'm not sure, but it's any owl that you see, it's always head first and the rest later. So it's interesting when they're gobbling it down, and you'll see this little tail sticking out of their mouths. All right, so we'll go on to the next one here. All right, so this one got its name from back in the early days because it's got a sound like a saw cutting through wet wood, and it's very loud. And I know of people that have had them in their, either not so much their backyards or in the wooded property behind their property. They're very mating season for them begins in late January, early February. So this is when the male starts calling for the female, and a lot of people go, oh, almost like get a room because it's so loud, and in terms of that, how they voice. So let me play the first one, and it's more of a toot than it is maybe a hoot. All right. So, anybody like to take a guess?
Well, we have some guesses popping in.
Sure.
Are you going to touch a little bit about like wildlife ethics with owls, in particular, a little bit later on?
Yeah,
awesome.
Absolutely.
You have a couple questions on that. And then Julie had added to some of the notes about how to find them is look for poop and pellets or regurgitated bones and stuff.
Right. Especially with great horned owls. And Bart owls, you'll find a lot of, like, you'll see feathers at the base of a tree, you'll see bones, you'll see pellets. Pellets are a little hard to see because, they're usually, covered in brush, because once they cough up the pellet. Now, not sure anybody knows, but this is what owls and hawks do, is that they regurgitate a pellet. And when they do this, they can eat again, but they can't eat until they regurgitate a pellet. And the pellet is made up of things like fur and bone, and it's compressed by their digestive system, and it's coughed up into a pellet. And they cough up the pellet when, a few hours after they're eating. So if they eat in the morning, they're usually coughing up a pellet in the evening, late afternoon, that sort of idea. It takes them a few hours for their metabolism to make that pellet and to cough it up.
We had lots of people guessing that it's the northern saw-whet owl.
That's correct. That's correct. Yeah, like I said, the northern saw-whets, they're the size of a pop can. And so you're looking at, around 6 inches big. They're really, really hard to find because the northern saw-whets like to hide or sleep. They're a nocturnal owl, and they'll tuck up against the tree trunk. And it's usually like a spruce tree that they'll sleep in. So, unless you catch that angle and you actually see it, because they're, just covered in by the spruce branches, and they're usually up at the base of the tree. They're usually not all that high. Usually, a lot of times they're, 10, 15 feet high. They will go a little higher when it comes to their breeding season. And again, like other owls, they'll take a woodpecker hole and use it as their nest. And that's where they'll have the eggs. And like I said, we're getting into that time of year in January and February where the male starts looking for the female and starts calling really loudly for them. And that tooting sound, which is referred to as a saw cutting through wet wood, that's how they got their name.
Do you know what time of day they call out their mating calls?
Usually in the evening or like just after dark. So that's why a lot of people say, they're sleeping and they'll, hear the calling and they're like, oh, because it gets quite loud and it's very repetitive, right? So people go, oh, not again, kind of idea, right? But they're so small and the sound travels, so it's hard to find them. Usually what will happen again, like with northern saw-whets, they'll catch a prey, either the chickadees or the smaller birds are making a racket, so you'll be able to find them then. Or sharp eyes peeled, you're hiking through places where the trees are quite dense, and you just sort of look into the trees and along the sides of the trunk, and you might see a saw-whet. Let me just couple pics of the saw-whet here. Now the first image is of a saw-whet owlet. They're got a brown head and kind of an orangey brown body, and they're very active at night. So once the sun goes down, they just get really, really active. They like to say, that's an adult. It just caught itself a nice juicy vole for dinner. All right, so that's the northern saw-whet, and they're quite common in Alberta. You see them a lot, including in the city. Not necessarily the city parks, because the park has to be fairly dense, fairly densely in terms of the trees. But any good boreal forest around, you'll find a northern saw-whet. Now, this next owl species is usually sticks to places like Canada. It really doesn't venture to the U.S. at all. It does occasionally go to the northern U.S. states and stays for a couple weeks, but it's not common. It's very common throughout Canada, from coast to coast, up into Alaska and Yukon and Northwest Territories as well. And they're also very common in Finland and Scandinavian countries. Now, they've got more of a trilling sound to their call. Now, this little owl is a little smaller than a robin. I'd say, probably robin-ish size. Very efficient flyer, long tail. Like I said, loves loves the cooler temperatures, but of course, breeds in the summer months. And they like to breed in snags of treetops. So they'll breed in a tree that's 30, 40 feet high. That's like a dead tree, and they'll make their nest inside lay their eggs inside that snag. And usually they have between 3 to say 7 eggs. Common is 4. Anybody have a guess what they're called?
We have lots of people guessing snowy owl.
No, this one's a lot smaller. Now remember, snowy owls are a direct cousin of a great horned owl. Now this is called what they call a northern hawk owl. Now with the northern hawk owl, it's really interesting because they were named because they hunt very much like a hawk. Like owls don't really hover, and versus the northern hawk owl does hover. It hovers. It hunts just like a hawk would. And you notice that they're. Let me just quickly play it here. Notice their facial features look very much like a hawk, and hence how they got their name. But they are an owl species. Now this is the image. Very great, and they like to hunt in the boreal forest, and a lot of hunting they do as well. I noticed is places where there's where the forest floor has got a lot of down logs, a lot of high grass, things that make for humans easily to break their legs on, sort of idea. But of course, their prey, voles and mice, love to run through that dead trees and all that tall grass, so it makes it a perfect hunting grounds for the northern saw-whets, northern hawk owls. And because the northern hawk owls are very, you rarely see them, they really attract a crowd. A lot of people, when they hear about them, there's been some unfortunate incidents down in the northern states because they are so rare, and some of the landowners got a little angry at people for trespassing. And this is another thing that'll go on. This is part of the etiquette of any bird photography, any wildlife photography, and especially owls. Don't trespass. There's a reason the farmers put "do not trespass" on their property. It's not good for them, and technically, of course, they could charge you for trespassing. And if you get a bunch of photographers running around and jumping fences, and it really aggravates the farmer. And a lot of times the farmer or the landowner, they're out there for a reason. They buy their property out in the woods, to be isolated, to be quiet. The last thing they need is to have a bunch of people jumping their fences and running up and down their driveways. Just be courteous. If you want to go on the property, if you do see an owl that's on the property and say you don't have the reach of your lens, it doesn't hurt to go knock on the door and talk to them and ask permission to get on the land. Some will say no, some will say yes, depending on how aggravated they've been by other people in the past. It's interesting because some of the places I go, you'll see a lot of no trespassing signs, and you ask them, and a lot of them are I would say most of them are no, you can't come up, because they've been either asked so many times, or they've had so many people that have jumped their fences, ran up their property. So just be courteous if you're out there looking for owls, and especially things like great grays, snowy owls. You'll find a lot of them on private property. Just be courteous is the word I'm looking for. You wouldn't want someone traipsing through your backyard, sort of idea. So that's their backyard. So don't be courteous when you're out there.
Yeah. Hey, Rob, we have a couple of technical questions
Sure.
about some of the photos that you've shown. So one of them is about if you use any kind of lighting. Sherwin said that they saw catch lights in some of the photos in the owl's eyes. Did you use flash or anything like that when you're shooting from a distance?
I never use flash on an owl or on any bird. The reason I don't use flash is that strobe light, to me, I don't know if it would necessarily bug them. I know there's companies out there like, that make the better beamer, that send your flash and people use it with wildlife. I personally don't like flashes going off, so I don't think that the owls will either. What I do use, and that's kind of a secret tip, but I'll give it to you anyway. Sometimes I use like a headlamp, like one of those little portable headlamps. And because especially like one of the northern saw-whet here, let me just pick up the pic here. This one, which is one of my cards. Yeah, it was done at about an hour after sunset. We had followed the northern saw-whets. They were in central Alberta, and there was a family of, I think there was 4 or 5, and like I said, they're really snoozy during the day, and we'd get there about 3:30 sort of idea. We'd find them where they were, and they'd look up, they kind of dozy, but by the time the sun goes down, of course, worst possible time for a photographer when the sun goes down and you're like, oh, So, but we knew where they were flying around. So we just kind of got inventive and just used the light from a headlamp. And it just illuminated it just really well. And I think it didn't bug them. Like we weren't sure how they were going to react because we thought, but they didn't mind. And they've got the northern saw-whets have a really interesting communication pattern. Like there was 4 other saw-whets with this guy, and they were scattered throughout this park, and you could hear them communicating. And I don't want to call it play fight, but they were pretending they were catching prey, so they'd jump onto the ground and pretend they were grabbing things like on the ground, and then they'd fly back up and down. But all this happened at night, so of course you couldn't film it without some sort of light. So we used a headlamp, just a small little portable headlamp that you can buy at places like Amazon or MEC, and it was just enough to illuminate the owl, just enough to make the image.
That's a great tip. Another one was from Rain asking, how do you manage to get both the owl and the background skies in focus in some of the shots?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm usually shooting wide open. Now that's good or bad, sort of idea. So because you've got a shallower depth of field, especially shooting with a 600, you got a shallower depth of field. Now, I try to be. Personally, I try to be around 7.1 to f8. I find is a really sweet spot, especially in the 2 to 600. I find that's a really good sweet spot for as an f-stop goes. Gives a good, the depth of field isn't really shallow, but it's got enough to give you some background detail. And then the other times, usually, there is the odd time I'll go higher with an f-stop, but not generally. It's usually I try to keep my shutter speed higher because you never know with a bird, especially an owl, when it's going to take off. So you always want to try to keep your shutter speeds. I like to keep mine generally over 1/1000th, just so that I can capture the flight. But there is times like some of my cards. Let's see if I can find one here. I got a picture of one of the Pygmy Owls. And it's gone. Anyway, it's around here somewhere. But anyway, I had followed it from just before dusk, and waiting for it because I knew it was going to fly, and I knew that it was actively hunting, and I waited and I waited and I waited and I waited. and about a half an hour after sunset, so you still had a little bit of that glow, but of course you're up at 10,000, 11,000 ISO, and I think I did it at about 1/250th, 1/320 of a second, wide open, I had to go wide open just to keep me the shutter speed at something that's semi-usable. But I got great wing movement, so the wings look like it's a bee flying because they're just like so blurred, and you get the movement of the wings. Yet the face is sharp, and the bowl that it's got in its mouth is nice and sharp, and it's flying off from the ground from where it caught it.
And since you're touching on that, there's another gear-related question. Is there an advantage to photographing owls in low light with the Sony cameras? Like, have you found, even just shooting with mirrorless Sony cameras, if there's any advantage there?
Well, the biggest advantage with mirrorless shooting in low light is the handheldability of it.
The image stabilization.
The image stabilization in the Sony is really good because you got image stabilizer in the body, you get image stabilizer in the lens, and I find it really works well. I have friends that will only use the image stabilizer in the lens and not the body, but I find the way I shoot in my combination, I find that having the image stabilizer on the lens and the image stabilizer on the body at the same time, I find that it helps me a lot with the shooting. And nothing still doesn't beat a tripod. Like, I try to shoot on a tripod as much as I can, but there's times where you just can't. You can't get out and get your tripod. Like, I was photographing a snowy owl 2 weeks ago, and it was great. I got up to it, I got within about 50 yards of it, and I grabbed my camera and I started shooting. What I'll do is I'll do a kind of a combination. I'll get used to the owl, I'll get the owl used to me, and I'll photograph it, and just either by hand holding, or I'll use a sandbag through the sunroof or on the door frame, or I use the door frame period as a sort of a tripod kind of idea. And then when the owl sort of gets used to me and I get used to him or her, then I'll sort of weak back to the back and grab my tripod and then tripod. But like typical snowy owls, it watched me or heard me. It let me get my tripod, or let me set up my tripod. And the minute I turned to grab my camera, goodbye. Which is typical of a lot of owl species. You really got to watch them because they'll just take off. They'll just take off on you. All right, so let's move on to the next one. Now this one is one of my favorite owls. It's funny, up until 4 years ago, up until 5 years ago, I had never seen one in the wild. Everybody else was seeing them but me, and I was like, and I was going to places and still couldn't find them. And then one Labor Day weekend, I struck gold and found 7 of them in one day. And they're an amazing bird. They're an absolutely amazing bird. Now, does anybody have any guesses? They're very quiet normally. The only time that these owls usually communicate is during breeding season and when the chicks are born and when they're raising the chicks before the chicks fledge. This is when you hear them the most. But normally they're dead silent.
All right.
And there's a reason they're called the ghost of the forest.
So we're hearing great gray owl?
That is correct.
Okay.
That is correct. They're
Gosh,
called
you guys are so good.
They're
at
great.
this.
People are wonderful. The gray ghost of the forest, because literally you turn your head, you look back, you know, where to go. Like, they're here and then they're gone. They're very interesting. What I like to do with great grays is a lot of times you'll find them on fence posts and things like that in the country when they're actively hunting. And then, you wait. And a lot of time it's patience, and you wait. You could wait an hour, you could wait 2 hours. And you just sort of wait till it flies off the fence post, and then you see to the tree where it went, and then it makes it a little bit easier to find instead of just thing. But again, movement. You'll see movement, like you'll see the turn of the head. You'll see that something doesn't quite look right in the forest, and that's generally when you'll find a great gray. Now, the great gray is the largest owl species in North America by height, not by volume. By volume, it's still the great horned and the snowy owl weigh the heaviest. The snowy owl actually weighs heavier than a great horned. But as far as height goes, it's a super tall bird. You're looking at, the bird can be 1.5, 2 feet tall, sort of idea. But it's all feathers. Like, it's absolutely all feathers. Like, if you see an x-ray of a great gray owl or a dissection of a great gray, their body size is really, really small. So they'll really only eat voles and mice. That's their number one. I've seen them take it was probably a young rabbit, probably a juvenile rabbit sort of idea, and it was just like a leg. Someone had taken the leg kind of idea, and it was eating the leg. But because their mouths are and their digestive system is so small, they're forced to eat the smaller prey. Unlike the great horned owl, of course, like as we said, loves rabbit, loves skunks, loves small cats, loves small dogs. I know a few farmers that have lost cats. Let the cat out at night and the cat doesn't come home. There's a great horned owl in there. And of course, as everybody knows, owls are completely silent. They're the only bird that makes no sound at all. And there's been recordings, and there's absolutely like no blip on the recording, because how their feathers are situated and how they fly, they make absolutely no sound at all. And that's what gives them an advantage when they're catching their prey, is because the prey don't hear them coming. And great grays, you'll find them in the boreal forests of Alberta. You'll find them in boreal forests of Yellowstone. They have been known to be in the Pacific Northwest, again in some of the boreal forests on the coastline. They really do like the cooler weather. There was a reported sighting of great grays down in California, but that's not usually their territory because it gets a little too warm. They really do like the cold weather, and they can break through they have such power when they hunt, and they come at such a high velocity that when they hit the snow, if it's crusty or hard, they actually break through the snow. And then the great gray owl, their face is like a radar dish. So it's flat, but one ear is higher than the other. So it allows it to pinpoint their prey underneath the snow. So they actually hear it moving underneath the snow, because mice and voles, they use it as their travel corridor. So when the snow is hard packed, the owl has to break through the crusted snow to get through there. And great grays are wonderful at finding where they are, pinpointing them, and nabbing them. It's really cool to watch. It's really cool to watch a great gray hunt in the wild. It's really interesting. And they'll have 2 to 5 eggs. Most common is 2, but I've seen images and people have had like 4 in the nest, 4 young ones in the nest, kind of idea. But they're a great bird. They're a great bird. One of my all-time favorite owls. It's such a beautiful looking bird.
Now, with more challenging types of owls to photograph, we had a question a little bit earlier about what your thoughts are on the idea of like baiting owls to try to get like direct overhead shots, or if you had any thoughts on those types.
Yeah, every photographer has their own feeling about it. I personally don't bait. I want to say I don't really believe in it. Because it's not fair to the owl species. I do know that they do bait to when a bird is tagged. That's how they get the bird in close. Is that they use baiting to get the owl in close, and that's what has to be do. They can't exactly sneak up on it and bonk it in the head or tranquilize it like they would a big animal. So they have to bait them in order to tag them. As long as it's done respectfully, I guess. I'm neither I'm neither here or for against it sort of idea, because I do have a lot of good friends, and some of them do bait. I guess if you're gonna take that and then you publish your image, you should put on the image that this image was taken, with a baited species, something like that. I think that is important, just to make it recognized that, versus someone who's out sort of in the wild and just looking. That's just my feeling. And again, you talk to another photographer and they might just go, "Oh yeah, no problem at all," right? So it's just a personal thing. I know a lot of photographers, some of the birding sites, like Alberta Birds and some of the other bird sites, they absolutely detest baiting. So be it, sort of idea. Again, it's your own personal thing. There has been cases of some owls being overfed, and then sometimes they'll get habituated. Though it hasn't been really proven that they've gotten habituated to man, but you do got to think that they recognize man, they might sort of recognize food, sort of idea. But again, it hasn't really been proven. And I know people that do banding, and of course they have to bait to band, and they were saying that they haven't really noticed any different behavioral trend in the owl, sort of idea. So
okay,
that's just my
thank
own
you.
feeling. I'll wait the 2 hours. Sometimes you do kind of wish, but yeah, this have to, you're out there in the wilderness. You want to learn your species. And that's the other thing that I'll say about working with different animals and owls. The worst thing you can do, and I see it a lot, I don't know, with any species that I photograph, I see a lot of people that'll like jump out of their cars, go running up to it with a phone or a small camera, that sort of idea. Give it some space. I say to people, well, you don't like to have a camera lens stuck in your face. How do you think the animal feels? So give it its space. Learn the species. Learn its traits. Learn what it does. Watch how it hunts. Also, you'll learn your species. Like me and a good friend, we followed this family of great grays this year, and some of it was hunting through the forest. And we made she and he, both of them, both the male and the female, knew we were there. They knew that we were keeping a respectful distance. We both had long lenses, and they got used to us being there, and we got fantastic images of them hunting, and all because we weren't aggressive to them, so they knew that we weren't of any kind of harm to them. So get to know your species before you jump in there, because it's really interesting, because you'll get to know the owl species or whatever you're photographing. You'll get to know it really well. All right. All right, so our next one. This next owl likes to hang around with its distant cousin, the short-eared owl. Usually when you'll find a short-eared owl, you'll find this particular owl. They're very nocturnal. They're very hard to find. I don't find that they're in any place for any time too long. They do say that if you see this particular owl, that you'll see a number of them. I don't know. I've only seen the one that I've only seen in the wild. I've only seen the one, but it is possible that there was more than one. But of course, then they blend in so well. And let me just quickly play a hoot. They're a very elongated owl, and some people get them confused with the great horned owl. Very nocturnal, love to hide, don't come out in the open very often. Usually you'll basically stumble across it, and then the word sort of gets out that there's one in the neighborhood, and so people will run out to photograph it. And like I said, people get it a lot confused with the great horned owl.
We have long-eared owl.
That is correct. because they're tufts, like the great horned owl have the big tufts on their head, a lot of people might think that it's a long-eared owl, but it's actually a great horn. A long-eared owl, you find, has got a very elongated body. And so it's even the first image where it's, it's just within the trees, and you're like, where is it? But they've got those definite ears that are hanging up high, and they got a flat face very similar to a great gray. So that's the long-eared owl. And like I said, I've only come across one in the wild. I know of a couple places where there's been some sightings, but I haven't found them yet. And again, they do usually like to come out right at dusk. They're usually nocturnal. And they'll hang around where their short-eared owl cousins are quite often, which I find interesting because the short-eared owl is much smaller than the long-eared owl. All right, so the next guy, as I just gave it away, but is the cousin to the long-eared owl. And they're throughout North America, and usually they are here year round, but the easiest time to find them is usually in wintertime is when they're seen the most. And they like to nest in the grass in farmers' fields, in the cut wheat. They like that protection sort of idea, so that's where they'll lie. Does anybody remember what I was calling the cousin of the long-eared owl?
Might take them a second.
Sure, no problem. They're a little smaller, and one thing I'll find with them is it's the only owl that I've seen that has a tendency to hunt in packs. So you'll see multiple of this owl, and it's almost like they're rounding up the mice. They're chasing the mice or the voles into a particular area, and then one will peel off and go after the vole, and the other one will go on to the next whatever. But you'll usually see them where you see one, you will see many. They're a very what I find is a very social owl in terms of, like I said, they tend to hunt in packs. Now, I've never seen that proven that it's on the thing, but I've seen it through my own eyes that when they're hunting, they have a tendency to hunt in pairs or more, and it's almost like they're driving the mice or the voles in the field. It's very interesting.
So we have people saying short-eared.
That is correct. Again, another one of my favorites, and that one's called Cuckoo Bird, which I have a card for. That was a very cold day when I photographed that bird. It was 30 below with at least a 40 below wind chill factor, and it was right after the sun went down. It was cold. It was cold. And the thing I find with short-eared owls is they like to show off. They'll do a little dance. They'll like ballet poses, and they've got those fuzzy legs, like the leg warmers on their legs, and which go down to their talons, which I find is really interesting. So which keeps them warm. And like I said, they're usually you'll find them. Usually you'll find short-eared owls usually on the Alberta prairies, quite often in prairie land. They're not a mountainous bird at all. They like to live in the farmers' fields. That's where they make their nests. They usually will come out about an hour or so before dusk. That's generally when they're you'll see them the most active when they're hunting, and that's the time that you'll see them most active. And of all the birds that I've mentioned so far, they all stick around here in Alberta 24/7, 365 days a year. So they don't go south. Like a lot of people will come to me and go, oh, well, you're still photographing owls. I go, yes. Majority of the owl species in Alberta don't fly south for winter. They stick around. So they stick it out from, from good old Alberta temperatures to, minus 30 Celsius, minus 40 Celsius, to, snow, to non-snow. A couple of years ago when we had a lot of the snow, some of the smaller owls were having a hard time breaking through the hard crusted snow. Like the great gray, because it's large and the volume and how it hits the snow can break through the snow, versus the smaller birds like a short-tailed, a northern saw-whet. They really have a hard time breaking that snow when it's really hard and crusted. So there's a lot of owls that were going to some of the rehabilitation centers a couple of years ago because of the thick snow that we had, such the heavy snowpack that we had.
A couple people are asking if you had the call of the short-eared owl.
Yeah. Yeah, they're kind of like a bark or scream. Here's their scream. And it's interesting how owls, I've really noticed owls bark. Not like a dog, like you think, oh, bark like a dog. But they do kind of bark. When they snap their beak, they got these kind of barks to them. And you're like, oh, that's really interesting. And I never, up until a few years ago, I never seen one. And then we were photographing a great horned owl one night. And all of a sudden, we heard this thing bark. And we're like, that is so bizarre. It wasn't hooting, it was barking. And I was like, wow, that is really cool. And they'll do it sometimes to call an alarm, if there's a predator nearby. Short-eared owls will be picked on by things like northern harriers, rough-legged hawks, because they're a little bit smaller. You'll usually find that they're hunting the same territory, so that they'll be picked on by some of the medium-sized to larger-sized hawks. All right, so our next owl. This owl does fly south for the winter. It's very common in places like Florida and Arizona. It likes the warmer temperatures. It really likes the open prairie, and they like it hot. They'll breed up here. They'll breed in northern Montana. They'll breed in Alberta. And they'll breed on the Alberta prairies. Let me quickly play a call. You a lot of times will find them on the southern prairies. Quite often, you'll see them on fence posts. They're about the size of a robin. They have really long legs. So, like at first look, you think, oh, it's a robin, but then you start looking at it and you're like, whoa, it's an actual owl. So
Burrowing owl?
that is correct. And
if
that
you
is
guys were in a game show, you'd
that's
all
right.
win.
We winners. That's right. And that is the only Alberta owl that goes south for the winter. And they usually come back, end of April, early May, and they go back south in September, back down to the south. And they will hunt things like mice and voles, but they love things like crickets and beetles. This family of burrowing owls that I followed a couple of years ago, it was so, kind of did a little dance, and then it was on a rock, and I was photographing it. It was on a rock, and I was, a decent distance away, and I knew he was there, but it jumped up, and I thought, oh, okay, that's it. It's all done, and I was ready to pack up my gear, and it flew to the field. And probably, maybe 100 yards, dove down, got something, and brought it back to the rock that he was on, and he held it up in his talons. He had caught a beetle, and he held it up in his talons as to say, look what I caught, which was very cute of it, And that's one of their favorite. They like beetles, and they like bugs and that as well as mice and things like that. Most of the mice that they'll catch is usually for the youngins. But then when they get to the adults, they'll go for the bugs kind of idea. And they are. The burrowing owl is a protected species in Alberta. Actually, most owls are protected, but the burrowing owl is very protected. And a lot of times with the burrowing owls is that a lot of because there's so much paperwork involved, and if you have a burrowing owl nest site on your field, the government wants to get involved, and they want to know about them, and so a lot of the farmers won't tell anybody if they got burrowing owls. So you really either got to find them, or make really good friends with the farmer that's got them, and he trusts you that that he knows that you won't tell anybody where they're at. And you'll find them quite commonly down in like the southeastern corner of the province, especially when it gets really hot. Like I said, you'll see them on fence posts quite often in the morning and the evening. That's when you'll see them the most. And they like gopher holes. So at one time, the burrowing owl was almost extinct because when the farmers were using pesticides, of course, it killed the owls because they like to live in the gopher holes that they've been kindly left for them by their prey, kind of idea. And so, of course, when the farmers used to use pesticides in their field, of course, it would kill off a lot of the burrowing owls. So once they stopped figured out that the pesticides were killing the burrowing owls, they stopped using it for a number of other reasons too. But the burrowing owl population has now come back, and it's an amazing bird to see. And you see them run more than they fly. They will fly, but they're like little leaps versus flights because their legs are so long, and they just kind of jump and they do a lot of stretching and things like that. Let me show you some pics of some burrowing owls.
Okay, and I think if our tech team has counted right, we've gone through 9 owls so far. Is that right?
What have we missed? There should be 10.
Okay, so we have one more after
we
this
have
one?
one more.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, notice how they like to stretch. Notice how long legs are there. And see how they pose on that rock top. I call that the ballet owl. Now, our next and our last owl species is probably everybody's favorite. They're, of course, common in Alberta in the wintertime. They go back to their home in the Arctic in the summertime. That's where they breed. They breed on the tundra in the Arctic. Most owl photographers, most bird photographers love this owl. They wait for it every year. Usually starts coming down. Sometimes you'll see them in late October, but it's usually early November, mid-November that you really start to see them. And they make the long flight down from their home in the Arctic to, they'll go down as far as, mid-United States. There has been some that have been seen in California and Florida in the odd years. Every so often there'll be a year where they're overabundance. So if there's an overabundance of prey in the Arctic, and it's a good breeding season, and there's many, you'll see an abundance of them in places like Vancouver, Seattle. Like last year, they were showing up in Seattle, and people in Seattle were going crazy. They're seeing them on rooftops and things like that, because they usually don't see this particular owl, and you usually don't hear them talk either. These owls don't talk a whole lot. They're very quiet. You've probably all guessed which is one.
Yeah, we have lots of love for them as well in the chat. So is this the snowy owl?
That is correct. Now, can anybody tell me the difference between a female snowy and a male snowy?
That's a good question. Well, to answer that, we have a question for you. If you know where are some of the best places in Alberta to find snowy owls?
East.
Okay,
prairies.
Eastern Alberta.
Eastern Alberta. Go on to the eastern prairies and drive.
Lots of wild horses out there, too.
Yeah, well, wild horses are more in the northwest than they are in the northeast. It's almost like a dividing line. It's like the Great Greys have said, okay, we'll take the mountainous terrain, and you guys take the prairies, sort of idea. And the great horn is like, I don't care, you can come in. Because the great horn is about the same size. The snowy owl is the same, is a very close cousin to the great horned owl. And so you'll find great horned owls and snowy owls very much intermixed, living in the same territory, except a great horned owl will live in a tree and a snowy owl will live in the tundra or in the farmer's field. And they like to keep warm with that chopped hay.
So the answers here we have are that the males are usually completely white, where the females have more markings on them.
Right.
Different things like
right.
that.
So
Yeah. And bigger.
yeah, right. In owl species, unlike bears and wolves and things like that, in owl species, the male is a lot smaller, sometimes half the size of what the female is. But you really don't notice that unless of course they're side by side. But if you see the female and the male, like especially like a great horned owl, and you'll see the male next to the male is a lot trimmer, leaner, and shorter, where the female is, I want to say plumper, excuse me for the pun, but she is, and she's bigger and much more rounded. The head is much more rounded, I find. Also found with great horned owls is that the males seem to be a lot grayer, a lot lighter in color, usually, not always, but quite often, and the female is a lot darker, a lot more browns mixed in with her fur. So with the snowies, the males, an adolescent male will quite often have some black striations as well. Now, usually not as much as the female, but we'll have them sometimes. So sometimes you'll see a male and you think, oh, it's a female, because you'll see the striations. But if you look really close, it's not usually as thick. All right, here. It's just a quick movie I put together, and then, So this is a male snowy. It's so rare to find them in trees. Snowy owls, it's so, you find them in a tree, you're like, oh, I scored, because you see them mostly on ground, telephone poles, power poles, things like that sort of idea. So it's really tough to find them in trees. And when you happen to see one in a tree, you're like, score.
What's the best time of day?
Usually morning or evening. Evening in terms of like late afternoon is your sort of the best time. Now, snowy owls are diurnal, so they'll hunt during the day, they'll hunt during the night. They don't care. They'll hunt at any time of the day or night to catch their prey. Then interesting thing with snowies, of course, before we had the snow, it's really easy to find them when they stick out on the yellow hay, because you see this white thing in the middle of like nowhere, and you're like, there's a snowy, because their head's just like bloom, glow, right? There's that file I was looking for. And a lot of times with snowies, you'll also find them on natural gas pipe inlets and things like that, on the piping. They like to sit there and look for prey, and sometimes they'll just sit there sunning themselves in the sun. There's a lot of research done because a lot of times you'll see a lot of owls, especially snowy owls, you'll see them face the sunset when the sun's going down. And they're like, well, why is that? And I don't know if they need, if it's the warmth of the sun or they're attracted to the sun. There's been a lot of research done, but nothing's been scientifically proven to say this is why they do it. But you'll see a lot of them, like when you see them on telephone poles and power poles, at dusk, you'll see them watching the sunset. It's really kind of cool. Just like we'd watch the sunset in like Hawaii or something. They come down here to escape the Arctic winter, and they'll watch the sun go down. And I don't know if it's to get warmth in their body, but that's probably what it is, because the sun has such healing powers. So yeah, those are the 11 owl species of Alberta.
Wow.
Technically, there's 11 and a half. There is an owl species that comes very, very, probably like every 10 years or so. It's called an eastern screech owl. It comes as far as Medicine Hat, and that's it, and then it's in. But it's funny because it's only seen, Yeah, it's only seen like every 10 years, every 6 years, something like that. So it's not really a native species of Alberta, so it's not really included in it, even though it does sometimes cross province, cross provincial borders and comes in. And they're really hard to find because they'll hide out in the trunk of a tree and in a hole, and they blend in so well. You'll see a lot of them. There's a western screech owl, but of course it's usually, you'll go Vernon, Kelowna, and west. And then there's the eastern screech owl, which is usually like eastern Saskatchewan, Manitoba, a lot of in Ontario, a lot in the eastern states as well. But a very, very rare visitor to Alberta. It comes, but very rare. And a visitor, because it is so rare, they don't call it a native species of Alberta.
Excellent. Well, we have lots of people saying thank you so much for all this wonderful information.
I have a small presentation as well for those who want to sit, who have the time and want to sit and watch it. I can start it shortly. It's probably about 10 minutes. I don't know if anyone's got the time. If they want to see it, great, I can put it on. For those that got to go, I really thank you for coming out. That's great, taking the time to listen to me. My passion, I just love. It's peaceful for me going out into the country, looking for owls, looking for any kind of wildlife, but owls especially. I love finding them. I love photographing them. I love watching their behavior. You really get to learn a lot about the subject matter, seeing, and just like a human, every owl has a different personality. From the smallest one to the biggest one, they all have their own personality and they all talk. Most owls are breed for life, so they usually find a mate and they breed for life. Unlike the great gray owl will have a different mate usually every year. And it's usually, and it's funny because with the great gray owl, it's usually, with every owl species, it's usually the female that looks after the young ones. The male will bring food and things like that, but it's usually the female who does most of the looking after of the young ones. Then once the owls fledge, again, it's the female. But with the great gray owl, now again, as I said, they don't mate. They're one of the particular ones that don't mate for light. They have different mates every year, and sometimes the male might have 2 mates on the go in a year. Sometimes, not necessarily always, but there has been cases where the male will have two females in different nests on the go, sort of idea. And then once the chicks are born and fledge, it's the male that looks after them, and the female beats it. Sort of, and the female takes off, So you're kind of like, whoa, that's entirely different kind of idea, right? So, but that's just in the gray grays. All the others breed for life that I know of. And attract their mate.
Well, we'll end with your photo presentation for anyone that wants to stick around and watch it. But I just want to say a couple last words. Again, thank you to Sony Canada.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much to Sony for sponsoring it and allowing us to put this on. And they've become great friends of mine over the years. And our local rep Anthony, who's a terrific gentleman. Great. He's also loves to go out and shoot wildlife as well.
You got to hold up that Turner 600 so people can see how small it is.
Yeah, it's so light. Like when you're walking through it, you got to think. Okay, so you're walking through a boreal forest, which is usually quite heavily densed with brush. It's such the perfect balance. Like I use a cotton carrier holster where it sits here, so it's easy to run through the bush kind of idea, and then when you see something, you easily to grab it and pull it out, and then you can maneuver, and you're not kind of idea, you're not overly, and yes, it's a little bit heavy, but it's light enough that you can still handhold it and get some really great images with it. And then of course Sony is making some really high-end sensors which make it very good. Someone asked the question earlier, did I find the Sony better at higher ISOs? Is the reason? No, I find that the image stabilizer is in the Sony is probably one of the best out of any of the systems that I have used. I have used other systems in the past. They're all great systems. A friend of mine, a dear friend of mine, who has just recently passed, about 4 years ago. About 4 years ago, he was doing movie set photography, and he's like, "You got to try the Sony. You got to try the Sony." And I was like, "Yeah," sort of idea, and I was like, and I did. I took it out to one of my great gray hiding spots, and I was photographing some in flight, and I was just, wow, I was just really blown away by the speed of the autofocus system, how it handled everything. I really, really liked it. And then that same year, the fall of that same year, I went up to Churchill, Manitoba, and all I brought with me was a Sony body, and at that time there was only the 100 to 400 and a wide-angle lens and a 2x converter. And the guys I went with, had big full Nikon gear, Canon gear, big DSLRs. They got great images as well, but just seeing them, like we rented vehicles, so we were in a vehicle, and just seeing, because they're bigger systems, just seeing how they manipulated them in the confines of the vehicle, where mine was so small, being the mirrorless system, and I get that still today. People come up to me when I'm out in the wild and I'm photographing something, and go, "Oh, just love that Sony. It's like dead quiet. It's just absolutely quiet. You just can't even, because you'll hear the other systems and you'll hear the I want to say the clunk of the mirror as the mirror goes up and down, the flap of the mirror, and and you can tell when they're taking the image, whereas the Sony is just, and the other mirrors have gotten to be quiet as well now too, but the Sony, I think, were one of the first ones out there that had it so quiet. And of course, all the cameras now, Sony as well, that their new sensors are just wonderful at the higher ISOs, just really, really good. I know me and a friend of mine, who I go out and photograph with quite a bit, we talk a lot about the A7S III. It is designed as a movie camera per se, but you can shoot at some of the really high ISOs without any noise whatsoever, and it's one of the better cameras for high ISOs, and especially for owls. I think it might be a benefit of mine to pick one up later on, because I am doing a lot of, they're not out in the open, they're not usually out in the sun. The snowy owls are, the snowy owls out in the open, but things like great grays, which hide in the boreal forest, the hawk owls, a lot of the owls that come out at dusk, the sun's going down and you're just like, oh, right? As you're losing the speed of the light, and cranking the ISO and things like that. I usually, myself personally, I won't go any higher than 6400, but I do break the rule occasionally, and I will shoot at 10,000 or 11,000 ISO, and there is some great software out there too that will help you denoise a lot of your images to bring it to be very useful.
Oh yeah, it's come a long way, and of course with mirrorless, yeah, you can really push stuff. And
absolutely,
fantastic,
you really can.
So.
And and I understand nobody makes a bad system, really. No. They're all very good. They're all excellent, and it's your own choice and whatever you've got. Mm-hmm. And if you got to adapt lenses, there's all these adapters now.
Totally, but Sony has that 200 to 600 millimeter.
That's right. Sony's got the 2 to 6, and you get the A7R4
and that autofocus system, Rob. You gotta say that. For sure.
And you do the A1, which has an anti-blackout viewfinder, at 30 frames a second, you're just like, unbelievable, right? And that's the thing that got me with the Sony system, with the A9s and the A1s, A9 IIs. I couldn't get used to looking at first with because as a friend of mine said, it's like looking at a TV screen, and yeah, so much it is, but you get the blackout, and that drove me crazy, versus the optical. You didn't see that in an optical viewfinder, and so that was driving me crazy. And then when, of course, as I said, my friend, and he said, it has an anti-blackout viewfinder, and you're just like, this is amazing, and you're using it, and you're like, this is amazing. So if you're tracking a bird in flight, you're not getting any of the blackout, and you're just following natural, and it works so well. It works so well. That's fantastic. And I'd like to thank Sony for really improving my photography over the last 5 years. Definitely have given me a big shot in the arm. So anyway.
Well, thanks, Anthony. Thanks to
Thank you,
Sony
everybody.
Canada
Yeah,
and to everyone.
Thanks
We
to the
will-
camera store for hosting it.
Oh, thanks, Rob. We're
Yeah,
so happy to
yeah.
have you. And last little shout out about your photo cards. They are 20% off on the Camera Store website. And so Riley can maybe post that link in the comments one more time for you guys to check them out. They make a great gift, and of course, like, it's great to be able to support photographers like Rob, support local, and we have lots in stock ready to go for Christmas. So check that out. But thank you again for watching tonight. We will end with some photos for you guys to watch, and hopefully we'll catch you all again very soon.
Just wanted to add a quick, I don't know if I can add a quick note.
Sure.
The camera store doesn't carry all my cards, but they do got a really good selection of them. So if there's something that you don't see, you can always just email me at rob@rhphotography.com and I'll hook you up there too. So anyway, let me find that presentation. There we go. Unfortunately, I couldn't put it to music because copyright laws, but hope you enjoy it, and